All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our session this evening on Plato and the Timaeus amongst the Arabs. And I am delighted to welcome my friend Rhatib here to present to us on this topic. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what he has to say about it. I'm sure it will be an illuminating talk. Please, Rhatib.
Thank you, Brian. Let's hope so. Um, yeah. Okay. So it's in the title now. It's not as simple as a title though, but I will. Well, I'll get to the structure of what I want to present very soon. But I do want to begin in the spirit of the Timaeus and also of our respective traditions. Now, at the beginning of right before Timaeus goes into his main narrative, after the story of Atlantis, there's just a simple lines that are said, surely, because it's common sense, surely anyone with any sense at all will always call upon God before setting out on any venture. And so I hope to have at least that level of sense. And so I will call upon my God. And this is from a text by Sir Hawardi that I'm working on. Unfortunately, it's not in English yet. But so I've just taken a small portion, which I like quite a bit. So, O you who has cast his light in the being of those who have preceded, who has manifested his majesty to the souls of others. Oh, sorry. O you who has cast his light in the being of those who have preceded, who has manifested his majesty to the souls of others, in whose glory the inner kernels of those with vision have been wiped away. Place us amongst those who long for you and who know your graces. And in case anyone's interested, this is from a text called Kalimat al-Tasawwuf, which is only in Arabic for now, but it translates roughly as the word of Sufism. So with that, let's embark. I am going to probably repeat many things that you are all aware of, and it should be no surprise that this is, though I am pursuing graduate studies, I'm by no means an authority on the reception of Plato amongst the Arabs. For one thing, it's quite difficult because the dialogues themselves, which I'm sure you all know, there's very little evidence that they were translated in completion or in a way that resembles our access to Plato today in English, for example. Nevertheless, there are things here and there, and I will try to hopefully explain the rationale and the ways in which we could see Plato in the Islamic tradition. So the main point I would like to start with is that you will see Plato, Socrates, and Aristotle in Islamic text from the very beginning, from people like Al-Geber, that's his Latin name, Jabir ibn Hayyan, the alchemist, all the way down to people like Mullah Sadra, who was, kind of I guess, not a modern, but late classical, post-classical Islamic great metaphysician of Iran. They will all look to the Hellenistic predecessors as great sages, and usually they are included in some way with the bunch of the prophets. So the prophets of Abraham, of the Jews and the Muslims, the Christians. So Plato tends to actually have, amongst the more mystically inclined philosophers and metaphysician, a place of supreme honor. Just off of the top of my head, Suhrawardi, in the opening of his text, calls both Plato and Aristotle masters, but he gives deference to Plato because he was a master of both the discursive sciences, logic and reason, and of the intuitive science, or the science of the soul, or mysticism, for lack of a better term. So they are all compared, and along with people like Empedocles, Pythagoras, these are all great sages. Hermes, of course. Now, it's questionable sometimes the extent to which they are simply imitating prior Muslim scholars and philosophers and physicians in praising what they've inherited. It's difficult to disentangle that from access to specific discrete texts. And for that reason, I think there's a bit of trepidation to take, for example, Jabir ibn Hayyan, Al-Geber, he opens a lot of his epistles by giving definitions according to different philosophers. And there's no citations, not that that was expected, but we don't know what the nature of that transmission was. It could have been textual, it could have been oral, it could have been a mixture, but the point is that from the point of view of academics today and scholars, we do not have Platonic texts in completion in an extant form at all. Now, but that being said, there are 3 strands of inheritance, or 4, but I'm going to be focusing on very specific examples. And there's obviously more than this. Medicine, this is mainly in what's called the Arabic Galen or the Pseudo-Galen corpus, primarily in people like Hunayn ibn Ishaq, who was an early Christian Baghdad translator associated with Al-Kindi. Avicenna, of course, who needs no introduction. Al-Razi, who is another great physician scholar of the Islamic tradition. Then you have cosmology and Brethren of Purity, Avicenna against Suhrawardi, alchemy, in people like Al-Geber, and then metaphysics. And I'm listing a text that is not available now in English. It's barely known about in Arabic, but it's a 14th century text which translates as the Noetic Platonic Forms by the anonymous Arabic Platonist. So, and then on top of that, you have the added issue of trying to distinguish between Aristotle and Plato. Now, it's well known that Al-Farabi and Al-Kindi, these early Islamic philosophers, to what there was, I would say that there was a drive or sort of an intuitive belief that if you had a line of philosophical knowledge, that there has to be a way of bringing them into harmony with one another. And so Aristotle and Plato, where on the face of it they would be seen to be in disagreement, as for example in the nature of the forms, or I guess what we'd call universals, or the nature of the soul, the independent existence of the soul from the body. On these sorts of questions, it wasn't a matter of Aristotelian versus Platonist, but because Aristotle was a Plato student, there was almost an implicit assumption that we have to sort of interpret Aristotle in order to fit with Plato. I don't know if that's universal, but it seemed to be the way that these early scholars of Islam and philosophers received the Hellenic inheritance. So, like I said, there is a slight problem in the sense that there's very little of the dialogues that have made it into Arabic. Now, what we do have are translations, epitomes, quotations. I'll list some specific ones next. But more importantly, I would say we have 2 real major texts, one of which I know was quite impactful in the scholastic Latin tradition. Now, we have and I hope I got these the right way around, because I sometimes confuse them, so correct me if I'm wrong, but we have the Book of Causes in Arabic. I'm actually, the title is, I'm forgetting the title, but it's selections, or I don't know if it's a reworking, but it's a modified and reimagined form of the contents of the Elements of Theology of Proclus. And this was present early on in Islamic circles, Arabic-speaking circles. Then we have the Theology of Aristotle, which I've only read very short sections of, and that is an epitome or selections with kind of interlinear commentary of several tracts from the Aeneids of Plotinus. And I would suggest that I'm sure you've all heard of Peter Adamson. He has a famous podcast on philosophy, but his area of interest is Al-Kindi, and he has a text, I believe, on actually the Arabic Plotinus. I think that's the name of the title. So he has some interesting textual things to say about the theology of Aristotle. But these are the 2 texts that are most apparently Platonic or Aristotelian in their structure. So not so much in their content, but in the sense that they are in their provenance. They're attributed to the Hellenistic predecessors. Then we have others, and so this is what was available in Arabic. Olympiodorus, John Philippanus, in fact, Al-Kindi, who's in 9th century Baghdad, part of something called the Al-Kindi circle. He was part of something called the House of Wisdom, which was a state-sponsored, basically, center for learning and translation. Now, the El-Kindi Circle produced many of these translations, a lot on the technical sciences, so astronomy, astrology, medicine, mathematics, optics, and there were, we don't know exactly why the dialogues were not translated, but from what I can gather, it's usually because the Arabs, it seems, did not have that much of an interest in the poetics or in the drama or the poetry of the Greeks or the Romans, and I don't know, but perhaps that played a role. Maybe if they did have access to the dialogues, the nature of the dialogue itself was, I wouldn't say impenetrable, but perhaps that was something of a stumbling block. But like I said, this is not my area of expertise. So the last thing I'll say, just as a way of background, is that it's hard to separate Plato from the Neoplatonists as the Muslims received him. And I think that most of us in this group, at least I don't see much of a chasm between Plato and the Neoplatonists as such. I don't think it's out of I don't think it's outrageous to suggest that they saw themselves as part of the coherent, tradition of a sort, notwithstanding breaks in history. So that's important if you guys do go on to read texts like Theology of Aristotle or the Book of Causes, because it seems like these are things that are seen to be continuously received and wholeheartedly taken in by the Arabs, and this sort of reiterates some of the things I was saying. So about the kind of nature of the Greco-Arabic translation movement. And the last thing I'll say is that that the figure of Socrates, or of Hermes for that matter, Hermes Trismegistus, or of maybe not so much Aristotle, but even Aristotle and Empedocles, these were sort of sages who if an Islamic scholar could attach himself to that thread, would be able to legitimize their systems. Now, I'm not suggesting that this was done with some ulterior motive, but they seem to be to have the imprimatur of Plato or Socrates or Aristotle. It's hard to distinguish when a thinker's doing that, like Jabir ibn Hayyan, if he's attributing definitions to one of these thinkers, which we can't find in what we have available. How is he receiving that, and could it just be at the end of the day that he wholeheartedly believes from these authorities, but he's doing it in order to vest himself with authority in what he says. So we do have the short answer is we do have a form of the Timaeus in Arabic, but it's and I haven't read it because I don't even think it's been published, but it is not easily recognizable as such. And that is in the book Galen and the Arabic Reception of Plato's Timaeus by, I should have put her name up here, but Das, D-A-S. She suggests that, there was a translation that was done, or at least it appears in a bibliography, very famous bibliography by Ibn Nadim. He's quite well known. It has a list of almost everything that was, that he knew was being written or translated at that time. So it's a vast compendium it's a vast bibliography. Now there is an attribution of a translation done of the Timaeus, not of a commentary or an epitome, but that the guy who was attributed to, I can't even remember his name, but there's no evidence. We just don't even know what that name is, who that name belongs to. What we do have are epitomes and commentaries, and in the fragments that we do have, there's no Atlantis story, which is at the beginning of the dialogue, and we don't have any of the sort of transitional exchanges between Socrates and Phaedrus. So what we have, it seems to be, are just the kind of the core middle part, if you will, or this kind of it's the bulk of it, but it's heavily cleaned up. So all the exchanges and back and forth, and some of the details even of the cosmology are just not there. And that is what leads this author Das to conclude that it was whatever the translator had access to, either it was itself in Greek an epitome, or the translator decided just to sort of get rid of what they thought were the kind of literary embellishments. But of course, having read Plato, I think we can all agree that it's hard to just, literary embellishments can be something a lot deeper. So what I will do, and I've probably wasted already a lot of time, but I suggest I'm just going to give basically snapshots of what I deem to be traces of themes that are in the Timaeus. And I am offering my apology because it's quite idiosyncratic based on what I've been exposed to. But the things that stuck out to me as Platonic or roughly Neoplatonic, and so I'm going to just briefly mention the Arabic Galen. I'll be treating a little bit of Ibn Arabi, the Brethren of Purity, and Jabir ibn Hayyan. Any questions so far? I'll just keep going? All right. So the Galenic Legacy, the author, and I'll show the book since I should have included the title, but just to get to her name, Aileen Das. It's a new publication. I think it was done in 2019, but she has some very good bibliographical information. Her thesis, I don't know that I understand it all that well to judge it, but her thesis seems to be that Galen, the historical Galen, born into a patrician family, wanted to grant medicine a rank, a majesty that was on equal footing with philosophy or metaphysics and logic and the sort of the higher sciences, if you will. And so he, in his works, and then of course is reflected in the Arabic Galen, he tried to root the art of medicine, which was a techne or a craft rather than an episteme. And sorry for my pronunciation, but he wanted to grant something that was an art directed at bringing about a certain effect or a product, for example, in the body. In medicine, he wanted to try to grant it something higher, and also to grant it something resembling the strength of demonstrative reasoning, rather than empirical study, trials, or something of that sort. So that's her thesis. That's how her appraisal of Galen as a figure. And then the Islamic physicians and philosophers took that and ran with it. And this is in the context, of course, because what we know of the Timaeus is really only preserved in the Galenic corpus. So, and of course, one of the bulk of her book is to try to demonstrate that in these discussions of very minute, specific medical either procedures or the nature or of anatomy, that there's a teleological orientation to all these discussions, such that in the description of the eye, for example, we have a microcosmic discussion of metaphysical principles operative in the cosmos. Now, this text, so like I said, the bibliographies, they hint that there was a closed translation, but nothing of that really survives. So we only have what is called the Arabic Galenic tradition. And there are actually Galenic epistles available in English and Arabic on Amazon, though those are unrelated to what I'm presenting today. And like I said, the Greco-Arabic translation movement was more or less 9th and 10th century Baghdad at a facility or a university of a sort, an institute of a sort called the House of Wisdom or the Beit al-Hikmah. Okay, so now we get to the actual Timaeus. There are three editions, if you will, or three variants of the Timaeus, or what could be called, or what was called the Timaeus by the Arabs. And the first was called the Timaeus. I've just put the transliteration, Ar-Ruhani, so the spiritual Timaeus, which was a paraphrase translated by a man known as Yahya ibn al-Batriq. He was a 9th century Melkite who in the West is known as Eutychius. He was a patriarch of Alexandria. He was under Egypt was under the rule of the Muslims at that time, but he wrote primarily in Arabic. Then we have the Timaeus Tabi'i, or the physical Timaeus, which are fragments from Galen's commentary, which were done in the 9th century by a man, a well-known translator known as Hunayn ibn Ishaq, who is a Christian contemporary of Al-Kindi, and he was actually a member of the Al-Kindi circle. So, this was, and he had translated, I think, dozens, if not hundreds, of texts on medicine and astronomy and such. Lastly, we have what is called the Timaeus al-Tibbi, or the medical Timaeus, which is just, I think, a pretty approximate translation of a text attributed to Galen called the Medical Statements in Plato's Timaeus, which was, I don't think it was done by Hunayn ibn Ishaq, but it was done in Baghdad, out of that same circle. I think, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, the Medical Timaeus was translated or was in circulation shortly after the physical Timaeus. But, as you can see, this is all three of these are coming out around in the same sort of 150-year period. Now, aside from that last point, all I meant to say was that there are also statements which are even present in sort of Aristotle's texts as we have them in English, which are sort of one step removed reports of what Plato believed, or what pre-Socratics, for that matter, believed. And so the Arabs did have access, it seems, to quite a bit of Aristotle, if not almost all of it. And so they were able to glean some things about Platonism or Plato himself through Aristotle. But these are just some of the sources that we have of how the Arabs came about knowing Plato. So I'll move on to Hunayn ibn Ishaq. He was a 9th, 10th century Christian resident of Baghdad. He knew both Greek and Arabic, and as many of you may well know, a lot of the translators employed by the state were actually Christian Arabs, because, of course, they knew both Greek and Arabic. Al-Kindi himself was Muslim, who's probably the most prominent of that whole group. I'm not going to comment about him, but he, in his main metaphysical text, it's called On the First Philosophy. We only have about half of it, but it's quite an impressive metaphysical work, more in line in style of Aristotle's metaphysics, but he has a protracted discussion on the against the eternity of the world, actually. But he, even though he was the most famous of the group, and he's called actually the father of Arabic philosophy and a very prominent figure, it does not seem that he knew any. It does not seem to be the case that he knew any Greek, and so he was relying upon the translations that were being produced by his circle, as well as, of course, producing his own works. Now, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, and I believe he had a son called Ishaq ibn Hunayn. So it's just switched because Ibn just means son of. They translated Hellenistic texts into Arabic, and a lot of these, like I said, were attributed to Galen. And this is how Galen was known to later thinkers. Of course, nowadays, scholars will try to distinguish, as in other cases, between the pseudo-Galen and Galen, the actual Galen. But I don't know that that's too important to the development of later medicine. But the physical Timaeus is the one that Hunayn did. And that is, we don't have the Greek for that. We just have the Arabic, and I believe there are sections of it that are being translated into English. And then here I just have, because I'm horrible with aesthetics, so I just put a nice picture from this is the beginning, his opening, the title page to one of his treatises. So it's here it says the first treatise from the book of Galen, or Jalenus. Okay, so now I'm going to shift quite radically in time and in topic. And I think I've assembled, I think, something of you'll have to forgive, it's somewhat idiosyncratic, but these are things that I've had to read or I've been exposed to or interested in, and I've sort of seen that there are certain principles or themes that resonate with Timaeus. And because of the lack of a kind of a strong, robust textual tradition of Platonism at the sort of high stages, or at least at the dialogues at the high stages of Islamic philosophy. I use that perhaps unjustifiably to give me some license to go into some other topics in Islamic philosophy, but I hope that they align at least somewhat. Now, I'm going to shift to Muhyiddin ibn Arabi, who was a 13th century, I don't even know what to call him. He's called the Sheik al-Akbar. I'll call him that, the great master, the greatest master. He was Andalusian, or born in Islamic Andalusia, and he was buried in Damascus. He's buried in Damascus, and he's considered to be one of the greatest mystics of Islam. Now, I'm just saying this as a Muslim that I don't take judgments of traditional figures by contemporary Muslims very, very seriously, because you might find some who are quite hesitant to even accept him or speak about him. But it's regardless, he is, I think, undeniably the greatest mystic or master of the Sunni tradition. And the Shias also read him as well. But I've only read a few short works by him, but his most famous text is called the Meccan Revelations. He performed the Hajj, or the obligatory ritual obligatory pilgrimage to Mecca in it's not, I think it was 1210 if I'm not mistaken, not 120. And it was his longest and most comprehensive of his works. I mean, it's a complete ocean. And the reason it's called the Meccan Revelations was because either during his visit to Mecca or shortly after, I think the story goes, he received some sort of visitation or illumination, and he began to compose this. But the text that I'll be very briefly examining is called the Bezels of Wisdom, or the Fusus al-Hakam. And the bezel is, of course, actually I can show you. I have a bezel right here on this ring. So it's usually a stone, but it's the seal. So it's the thing that you would, a fuss is the thing that a king would seal his letters with, and it would bear his insignia. Now, it's a relatively short text. It's about 150 pages, and the Classics of Western Spirituality has an edition of it translated by R.W.J. Austin. It's quite a good translation. I like it. I think there are others available, but that's the one that I use. And of course, I can access some of the Arabic. But it's a synopsis of it would basically be it's 27 chapters covering the prophets. Each chapter is devoted to a prophet, and each prophet represents, to put it simply and perhaps too simply, represents a certain attribute of God that is manifest and differentiated in the world of manifestation, basically in the world of creation. And so some of the associations are not so clear, at least to an untrained eye. Some of them were quite difficult, but some of them are it's quite clear, the association. So I believe Jesus, peace be upon him, was affiliated with the aspect of not intellection, but I think of something to do with speech. I can't remember the exact word. So there are certain associations that are clear, but it's a sort of a thematic. It's an approach to prophetic history, really, that is heavily metaphysically grounded and contains different layers, different veils of metaphysical thought. And it's one of the most popular texts. There are commentaries on it in the Sunni tradition, in the Shia tradition, in Arabic and Farsi. And it's probably one of his best known works. So just to give I don't want to take up too much time, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. But I just want to make a kind of quick comparison, if I can. I may be stretching my reading of the Timaeus, but I'm going to begin with this as my source text for the Timaeus. So whenever the craftsman looks at what is always changeless, he reproduces its form and character then. Of necessity, all that he so completes is beautiful. The cosmos is a work of craft, modeled after that which is changeless and grasped by a rational account. This world is an image of something. Now, and the reason I highlighted, or I put these in red, is because vision, image, obviously these are themes that you'll find in many different traditions, but Ibn Arabi has a acute sense of it, and very complex. He deploys vision, and as I'll hope to show, love in a very eros, in a very subtle manner. Now, I'll give you some basic terms. I don't know that if anyone's interested in this. I mean, I don't know how much use it'll be, but I can share this just if for nothing else, just to have references to text. But I've just put up some of the basic terms here, which we'll see in the quotations I'll use. So al-haq, it can mean in Arabic just the truth, the reality. It can have many different meanings, but the translation, Austin, he translates it as the reality, or the sort of the non-manifest deity, or the pre-manifest deity, or the absolute deity. Tajalli is just the basic word for manifestation, self-revelation, self-disclosure. Its linguistic meaning is just for something, I think, to become apparent. So, you can have something in a mirage, something on the horizon could become apparent. Al-ayan al-thabita, these are quite mysterious things, principles or realities, but I've seen them translated as immutable essences or fixed potentialities. And ayn is actually the word we have for eye, but it can also mean philosophically, like the kernel, or the I don't think it's ipseity, but it's something quite similar. It's the inner kernel or essence of a thing, of an actually existing thing. Thabita just means fixed or immutable. So these seem to be the way he uses them, latent essences that are comprehended, or in this sense encompassed in the absolute, in a state of potentiality of some sort, at least not with respect to the world of the manifest. So they're in a state of potentiality, and they're brought into existence, into manifestation. And then the last two, it was just to give a sort of sense of wholeness, but Insan al-Kamil is a very popular philosophical theme. It just means the perfect man, or the complete man. And man here is, in the sense of creation, the complete creature. So it's the Prophet Muhammad usually, but it can also have a sort of, it's something that one can strive for, to imitate the perfect man, or to become the perfect man. And it's in this sense, in the bezels of wisdom, it's the man who has, in imitation of the prophet, or many of the prophet, or all the prophets. It's the man who has attained perfection through a complete actualization of the attributes of God, which in this type of cosmology is a manifestation of those differentiated perfections. And then you have many different types of love, affective principles, of course. I know in Christianity and in the Hellenistic world, you have differences between eros and agape, and so there's similar sort of valences or subtleties in Arabic and the words for love. Now, if I can summarize, but I don't think summarize, but just to give a sense of it, the world of manifestation, which is tajalli, the world that we live in, creation, is a product, or is an active process of the ultimate reality of God, self-disclosure. And I'll get to what I mean by self-disclosure in the quote. But to try to break it down, it's the reality's beholding of itself. So as I'll show, there's a type of longing of God, or of the reality to behold itself. And so out of this desire, this providential desire, the world of differentiation comes to be. And so, of course, but as I think a basic principle of many of these ancient philosophies is that if there's any sort of movement from the one, or from the simple, there has to be differentiation, distinction of some sort, even if it's only an aspect. So even if it's only the difference between the beholder and the beheld. And so in this sense, God could be the deity could be beholding itself, and yet somehow mysteriously there has to be some sort of distinction in some way. And I'm suggesting that Ibn Arabi, as we saw in the beginning of Timaeus, and as we see in the Socratic in dialogues, Ibn Arabi is trying to give a rational account in the sense of, not in the sense of his origins, because he claims that this is something that is coming to him via inspiration, but that the unfolding of this cosmological order does have a rational, it can be given a rational account, and does have, has principles. And so what I suggest is that this differentiation from the deity's self-disclosure, the differentiation embedded in that is governed by certain dyadic and triadic relations that, if you will, sustain the realm of manifestation. And so with this system, you can have an affirmation of real distinction, real vis-a-vis the creature, but also of a unifying activity of self-disclosure, which is, sort of undergirding all differentiation. So here's how he opens up the text. And here, when I say Adam and things, these are the chapter names because they're devoted to certain prophets. And this is using the Austin translation. So the reality wanted to see the essences of his most beautiful names, or to see his own essence in an all-inclusive object encompassing the whole command, which qualified by existence would reveal to him his own mystery. Now the command, al-amr, is a word that is used in the Quran in this sense. It's not so clear, and I'm no theologian, but it's not so clear that I don't think it has an unambiguous meaning. But here it seems to be some sort of unifying, in this sense, in this case, pre-manifestation. I don't want to say act, and this is why it's difficult, but it's linked. His command is, it can be also used to describe very broadly creation as a whole. So not creation in the sense, not just creation in the sense of sorry, I got a little. Yeah, I can. Do you mean? Sorry, do you mean this right here? So I tried to put all of those citations here. So it's 28b to 29b.
Thank you.
That's what you were hinting at.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Let me see. Yeah. So this is how it opens, and this is why I wanted to include it, because this is how the first 4 pages go. This is how dense it is, But I kind of tried to give a linear summary, if you will, and I hope it makes, I'm not going to say sense, but that you can see that there's a type of unfolding here, because I can't include I can't just post the whole chapter, but there is this desire, this wanting, which is mashi'a. So it's not, and I'll get into why I put the Arabic, but it's a desire. It's sort of a providential desire. It also comes from the word for will, like divine will, for disclosure, meaning, what I mean by that is the reality wanted to see the essences of his beautiful name, or to see his own essence. And he goes on to say that he looks upon what can be translated as an undifferentiated thing. And I think the Arabic is something like, it's a word, one of the words that's used for matter philosophically. And the word for undifferentiated actually isn't, I mean, that's how he translates it, but it's kind of like dusky or dark or cloudy. So this is kind of like cloudy matter. Then the divine breath is God breathes upon this mirror, which he describes also as being the mirror image, uses it as it's a rusty mirror, because in those days, as the introduction to the book says, mirrors weren't, they weren't glass. They were sort of sometimes polished metal, or they had to be polished because they could be obscured. So there's a sort of mirror that is not as such ready to receive this kind of beauty and order and harmony of divine differentiations of these perfections. But the divine breath is a sort of overflowing, and actually the word is failed, which is that he uses, which is actually the philosophical word for to emanate. It's the word that's used for sort of emanation if you're talking about Neoplatonism or Suhardi. And so the sun also does fail. It shines or emanates. So the divine breath emanates upon this obscured mirror, and it seems to give sort of clarity using the mirror image, but also distinction. And these distinctions are nothing else than the divine names. Of course, it's not as simple as that, because how do you the divine names can manifest in multiple different creatures, but the idea is that there is a sort of receptacle, if you will, to invoke, a Timaeus image, which is the product. Granted, I think this is departure from Timaeus, but it's the product of the divine, of this divine will. That's what kicks it all off, and then it receives the breath, or the, if you will, the soul of some sort, from God, and then manifest differentiated creatures become manifest. Now, all creatures, of course, being a good monotheist, are sustained by this singular reality in their existence and also in their distinction. And the presence of that reality, and this is something I cannot speak about because I honestly think you have to have experienced it. There's, the presence is imminent within these creatures and their differentiations. And to borrow from Dionysus in some way, but I know Ibn Arabi speaks of veils, but not in this part. But I would suggest that these differentiations are sort of veils of light, which are intelligible, so they don't obscure, but they do in a way hide the perfect, or not the perfect, but the absolute deity, the haqq, the absolute reality in itself. And here, because as you can see, I'm a great artist, is my rendering of how this works. Now, I can go back to this later, but just to guide you through this, because it might be a little bit quicker. But here at the top, I don't know if you can see my mouse, but at the top we have the haqq, the reality, which is the what undergirds all manifestation, but also in that linear account that Ibn Arabi gives us. Okay, thanks. In that account I read from the opening of that first chapter, the reality is what yearns to see its, or what desires to see its own self. And so if we do, for the sake of reading him, take it in a linear fashion, the reality has its desire to see itself, but also to see, I think, to see his attributes. And so I describe this. I didn't put the Arabic here because I don't know that'd be too useful, but trust me when there are different Arabic words. So this desire is called mashi'a, which comes from sha'a, to will or to want. And I'm suggesting that it's a sort of providential love. Obviously, it's not like eros, which is a love that comes from need. It's Plotinus, I think, says that eros is the son of need and plenty, I think. And so there's a type of vacillation between fulfillment and satiation and desire and that sort of thing. So this is not eros. This is a sort of providential love, creative love, and it's because of there's an emanative aspect. There's an overflowing. It's a love that imparts to others. And of course, okay, so here's a question: what is it imparting to? if in this linear way, if the reality is creating the world of differentiated manifestation, what is it granting existence to? I didn't include the quotes because it would take forever, but there are other quotes he has, sometimes very mysterious, but he talks about these, I mentioned them earlier, these fixed essences, these stable entities. And he seems to suggest a type of, a sort of causality that I can only say confounds and easily, it confounds a temporal or even linear understanding of causality. And so the latent essences, even a diagram will probably obscure the meaning, obviously. But for sake of clarity, or for sake of explanation or attempt at that, the reality desires to see itself. But there are also these latent essences, ayana thabita, which seem to be yearning. He says in other places, they yearn for existence. They long for it. And that word is ishq. Sorry, ishq. So ISHQ is usually how it's translated. And that's a term that can be used as, he translates it as just desire. So he has desire both times. I'm not going to make too much of a fuss about it, but I think that there is, it's good for a translation, but there is a different type of love here. This is the sort of longing desire for existence, because these entities, do they exist prior to this emanation or this overflowing? I mean, I don't know. That's the thing. I don't know, but it seems that there's, rather than speak of from existence to non-existence, he seems to speak of a movement from being comprehended within the reality within the unmanifest reality, in a totality, in a sort of simplicity, and then a sort of articulation, a movement into full manifestation, if you will. So these being apart, the only reason I drew these apart is just to show that there's this sort of dynamic, this dyadic dynamic, basically, between creation and between the reality at all stages. And then this rectangle is just meant to represent sort of the theater of manifestation. So differentiation, multiplicity, what we call life, what we call ourselves, what we call the world, is the product, if you will, of a ceaseless dyadic interplay of love. One is a providential giving love, and one is a sort of erotic yearning love. And all of this, if you will, is encompassed within that first sentence of, the reality desired to see itself. Now, yes, we're quite far from the Timaeus, but I would suggest that I'm not going to suggest any historical link because I think that's extremely dubious, but I will suggest that there is a similar cosmological poetic dynamic that at least resembles and underlies even Ibn Arabi's opening couple pages to his text. I don't, how much time do I have left?
You can take as long as you need if you have more to say, really. Like we're
yeah I realize I have a lot more than I probably should have done, but are
No,
people
absolutely
keeping up?
No, that's fine. Yeah, just
okay. I hope I'm making some sense here.
No, of course. Yeah, no, it's
All right.
Great so far. Yeah.
So keep this in mind. And by the way, if anyone wants to go, if you guys want to go back to a slide or something, I mean, but this is just how I didn't realize this. I picked up a habit where I'd actually just draw things out. And I had a professor who was teaching me Plotinus, and I would draw these weird diagrams, and he just thought it was, I mean, he's a very dear teacher, but he kind of laughed and thought it was, he liked it, but I guess it's just what I do. So I hope it's of some use to you guys. So, okay, so I tried to give by way of summary, an attempt to condense this movement rather than this idea of, he uses this yearning, then this obscure mirror, this kind of dark matter or receptacle. He didn't say receptacle, but I'm just sort of substituting that. Then you have this divine breath, and then there's some other things. So there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, images that he uses, but it seems like this is the sort of movement that I perceived. So the divine cosmic synthesis. So that's actually, I think Austin uses that to describe just the world, basically creation, because it's the cosmos, but it's also the divine because there's this kind of movement. So that's why it's a synthesis. It begins in the creative desire of non-manifestation, of non-manifest reality for self-disclosure, right? So that's this movement here. The latent essences begin in a state of longing desire in the poverty of non-existence. So that's this one, and this is why it's erotic, because there's a poverty of non-existence, or rather, I should say, incomplete manifestation, as God would have providentially willed. And so they are satisfied by that creative mercy. And the colors, I should have explained this before, but I use them just to help me remember that I'm characterizing roughly active and passive, to use, I think, not an unwarranted erotic illusion. But so there's this type of satisfaction, and he has other quotes where he kind of hints at this dynamic. Now, once there's this meeting, if you will, of providential unfolding or emanation and longing desire, the essences that now exist, so you, me, the trees, the birds, they move in the theater of manifestation, meaning, they have their life, they have their sort of independent life, or at least what they perceive as, but there's still another level of longing for God in the poverty of an imperfect existence. And so the whole structure of his text is the idea that, yes, to be granted existence is fundamentally a mercy in itself. It's a blessing, but obviously within the hierarchy of the cosmos, according to different powers of the beasts and the animals and the birds and man, there are obviously ends that we seek to attain. And so man being the most exalted because he's the descendant of Adam, who's the first seal of God, or the first bezel of God. Man seeks to try to basically reach a type of perfection, and he still needs that. He's still dependent on that providential love, and the imitation of the prophets is one path, if you will, that they can reach a type of satisfaction. But even that is based on this providence from God. And so then the last stage, if you will, the longing of the existing essences is satisfied in the attainment of a perfected vision and a qualified annihilation in God in this life. Now, I didn't include this in slides, but at the very end, he talks about the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and it gets quite interesting. There's this type of perfection. He describes it with the analogy of sexual union and of annihilation at its height. I'll leave it there. But but basically that just as for him, the woman, or I think it's just as between lovers, a woman he describes annihilated in the man, that the soul is annihilated in God, and that is this is the qualified annihilation in God in this life. And this is what follows a perfected vision. And then, what happens after, how often this happens, is this like what Plotinus underwent? That's not for me to answer. So I've just kind of, now I have the actual words here. I won't spend too much time on this because this is just, I think, beating a dead horse at this point, but you have the dyad of love. So you have divine love, will, providential, it's active, self-sufficient, it's perfective, it's overflowing. Then you have the creature who also, he uses the same word, mahabba. So there's a link, but he also uses shouk, which is erotic in the sense that it's incomplete, it's in some respect passive, and it's not perfective, it's what is perfected, it's the direct object, if you will. And then you have also, along with this, you have the dynamic of vision, which we saw in that opening section of the Timaeus, that there's a type of the craftsman wants to imitate or sort of imbue his product or his art, his craft with the symmetry, the order, the perfection of the world of forms, or of his model, according to the capacity of the matter. And so there's obviously a very prominent vision plays a prominent role in that narrative, or in that section. And so similarly in Ibn Arabi, vision is quite important. Now, at the very beginning, when he said, at the opening section, when he says that the divine reality sought to see itself, the word is used as ru'ya, which is just a simple verb for, ara, ra'aytu, I saw. So it's, just the normal, seeing. Now, because this dynamic seems to be something which, if it had a point in time when things were kicked off, when they reached a new level of manifestation, it's not very clear. But I assume that, and this is just an assumption, so I could go completely off here, but it seems like the way he describes it, there's something eternal about this dynamic. And what leads me to say that is because if the divine essence is necessary and is eternal, and it has this longing, it seems odd to me to suggest that this longing began at a certain point. And so I just kind of go on the face of it and work on the assumption that it is an eternal dynamic. But in any case, divine vision, it might be akin to something like divine knowledge, in the sense that it eternally comprehends all of the natures, whether they are in their non-manifest state. Remember those fixed essences, those immutable essences, whether they're sort of latent in the absolute unity of the deity, or whether they have reached their predestined, appointed time of differentiated manifestation, which at the end of the day is nothing apart from the actualized self-disclosure of God to himself. And so the way I'd look at this is that, it's a fixative in the sort of chemical term, in the chemical sense or alchemical sense. It's what, despite the sort of the generation and corruption of our world, this is where we are fixed, if you will. Created natures are fixed in God's, in the comprehension of God's ineffable unity. And so it does also, I think he suggests that that there is an ontological link. It's not simply, as I think you guys are all aware of, it's not simply, there's no clear divide between, God knows us, and God's knowledge of us is something completely separate from our being brought into existence. That there is a link, but he doesn't spell it out, in the sort of nice scholastic or Aristotelian way that we'd like, because that's not what he does. Now, the creature, on the other hand, partakes in something called mushahada. And from where I was able to catch it when I read this text, he seems to be actually pretty consistent. He will mix them, but mushahada is almost always retained for the creature, not for the reality. And so witnessing, well, it could be actually just me seeing something in the street or seeing a tree, but there is, it's also the same term that Suhrawardi will use for divine beholding. It's used by, mystics and philosophers to describe a type of contemplative vision, basically. Now, in more scriptural terms, it can be translated as witnessing, because we bear the shahada is sometimes called it starts, I bear witness that there is no God but God. That's a declaration of faith in Islam, and that the Prophet is his messenger. And so mushahada is from that same root, and so it's to witness, but it's also to attest to something. It's like to affirm, if you will, the reality of. And so, of course, depending on your level of initiation, depending on the state of your soul, depending on your path, these things will vary, and it's capable of being perfected. So you have physical objects, that's a type of beholding. I see God's providence and arrangement of weather cycles, but it can obviously, there's an anagogical element to it, I think, implicit, where the veils can be lifted and you can go up to intelligible principles, the divine names, and perhaps ultimately a type of annihilation, which I mentioned briefly earlier on, and which, of course, is tied to that sort of that erotic or loving aspect. So, this is just another. I won't spend any time on this. It's just I presented it like this. To just look, there's a dynamic, and so that's. You'll forgive me for straying from the Timaeus quite a bit, but that's sort of my attempt at showing that these two themes, if not from the Timaeus, are nevertheless of vision and of love, of striving for perfection. That's another way of putting love and eros, because the way that even Suhrawardi would use this type of thing in his cosmology is that there is a love for what is higher ontologically. Every lower light, for example, every lower soul in the hierarchy loves what is above it and seeks to be perfected in returning to it, which is obviously not a million miles away from procession, reversion, and abiding that we see in people like Proclus or the Neoplatonists. And so whether that's from the Timaeus or not is something I cannot affirm, but if anything, it's testament to they were perhaps all tapping into the same, perhaps all beholding the same reality ultimately. So I could keep going. I just do want to mention one interesting thing. I do, of course, I talk about the Brethren of Purity and also Jabir ibn Hayyan, the alchemist, but I might just stop here with Ibn Arabi, but I just do want to mention this really quickly. It's not from the Timaeus, but I found it quite interesting. So this is from the Alcibiades, and this is a quote that I remember reading quite a long time ago, and I forgot where it was. I knew it was Plato, I just couldn't find it, and I found it about a year ago because it struck me it's very interesting when I first read it. But I think the subject here was about I don't think it was piety, but there were moral tones in the conversation between Alcibiades and Socrates at this point. I probably should have reviewed it more, but I just wanted to find the quote. So he says, and he's talking about the Delphic, the Delphic principle to know yourself or know thyself. So this is Socrates. He says, If the inscription took our eyes to be men and advised them, see thyself, when a man looks into an eye, his face appears in it like a mirror. We call this the pupil, for it's a sort of miniature of the man who's looking. Then the region in the soul resembles the divine. Oh, okay. So the first quote is, he's using this image that and of course, we can't forget that the kind of visceral elements of this dialogue, Alcibiades is speaking to Socrates face to face, as in all the dialogues. And so, he goes on to say that where do we look in the soul to find what is the highest and the most virtuous? He says that in that region in the soul, which is the highest thing, or the most virtuous or most divine, resembles the divine. And someone who looked at that and grasped everything divine, vision and understanding, would have the best grasp of himself as well. Now, just bear that in mind. I'm just bringing this up for a linguistic reason, but just my very, very rusty and introductory Greek, and I double checked this, but that where it says a miniature of the man who's looking, I think the word is another word for maiden, or also for doll, but that'll be important in a second. And it's also the word for pupil, as in the pupil of the eye. Now in Ibn Arabi, in that same text, and I did not put the source here, but I can find the page after I finish. This is from a different section. He says the reality, so it's the same reality, the adhaq. Oh no, this is the same one. Here, sorry. So this is just I don't know why I included this. So here, this is from later. This is from like the next page. So he continues, for the reality, so this is about Adam. So for the reality, he is, meaning he, Adam, is as the pupil is for the eye through which the act of seeing takes place. Thus he is called insan, for it is by him that the reality looks on his creation and bestows the mercy of existence on them. He is, meaning Adam, he is in relation to the cosmos as the seal is to the ring, the seal being that place whereon is engraved the token with which the king seals his treasure. So I didn't really even know this, but insan, which is a very, it's a word it's used today. It's used in Arabic all the time. It's the singular of another word, nas. There's a chapter in the Quran called Surat Nas, but insan is, I even found this in one of the old lexicons, English Arabic, that yes, in fact, insan was used to mean the pupil. And I don't know, I just find it, I find it quite interesting. I know different contexts, but that there's that linguistic similarity between, and here, I think I put it here, that kore can mean maid or pupil of a maiden or a pupil of the eye. It's also a name for Persephone. And insan can mean obviously a man, singular, or also the pupil of the eye. Now, of course, in the context of Ibn Arabi, and this is, I'll perhaps end on this, that whole dynamic that I was showing, and even if it is remotely accurate, if that could be said, we can't forget that, or it should be emphasized that this is all contained, that whole dynamic is contained in the kind of individual existence of potentially ultimately every human, but exemplified in the prophets. And so they become almost the locus of this manifestation, right? Because he says it's the pupil of the eye through which the act of seeing, meaning from that opening section, it's not just, as he says here, the reality looks on his creation and bestows the mercy of existence on them. But if we link it to this earlier quote, the reality wanted to see the essences of his names, or to see his own essence, right? And so it's not just that the world is, it's not that this box that I put here, bland box, is the world of manifestation, meaning, the heavens and the earths and heaven and hell. It's that, in a sense, I don't think it would be inappropriate to conclude that in some profound sense, man himself is the locus for that self-revelation, or for God's beholding of himself. And that I'll link that, perhaps this will be the last thing, I'll link that to the eros and the love, in the sense that for man to truly realize that, perhaps has to necessarily imply a type of that sort of well, almost violent annihilation, because that differentiation, or that ignorance of that self beholding that the reality desires, that differentiation, in some ways it completes it, but it also ultimately can be a veil of light. So yeah, I hope that was. I can keep going. I do like this part, just to maybe if you guys have a couple more minutes, I can keep going and just finish up with this. But this is from another section, and I hope, hopefully I hope the parallel between kind of the Pythagoreans or the Platonists will become a little bit more clear here. But he has a chapter, I think it's the fourth or fifth, but it's a chapter on Enoch, who of course is Idris, who of course was identified by many of these Muslims, Jabir included, as being Hermes, who of course is Thoth, and who are the gods of writing and of some of the sciences, and it's even in the Phaedrus. So there's a type of very interesting, and this is why I don't think it's accidental. I think this is something that was definitely transmitted through Hermeticism into Islam. But just bear that in mind, that this is the chapter on Enoch, who is Idris, who is Hermes, who is Thoth, who is affiliated, of course, with arithmetic, with alchemy, with other sciences, astronomy, astrology. So he says there might be. Oh, sorry. This is actually from so to try to give you guys a parallel, this is from Timaeus. So that there might be a conspicuous measure of the relative slowness and quickness with which they move along in their 8 revolutions, so the planetary spheres, the god kindled a light in the orbit second from the earth, the light that we now call the sun. Its chief work would be to shine upon the whole universe and to bestow upon all those living things appropriately endowed a share. Now, I suppose you could just say that is a share number. We can calculate our calendars, or we can calculate the passing of time. We can arrange our lives according to this share number, and you could just say it's perhaps proportions and mathematical realities, which I am unsuited to understand. Certain proportions in the heavens, but I would suggest that there could be something more to it. And to do that, I will go back to Ibn Arabi. So the essence is unique, right? So the essence is another word that he speaks about. Another word that is it's used coterminously with the haq, with the reality. The essence is unique, while the determinations are various. The realities, so here in the lowercase r, I think the realities of the manifest world, the realities are mingled, some with others. The numbers derive from the one according to the well-known groupings, tens and hundreds, etc. And that's added by the translator, the tens. Thus, the one makes number possible, and number deploys the one. For the fact that all numbers are collections of ones establishes at once that, as being different collections, they are relatively unique, and that as being all multiples of one, they derive entirely from the one. So here we have the good old Tetractys, and here it's the chapter on Enoch, page 86. That's not some odd verse from some book. This is from his chapter on Enoch, and so you have the one, and then as we saw, the one makes number possible. Now he doesn't say that the one is not a number, but perhaps that's beside the point. But the one seems to be more than a number, if I can say that at the very least. So it makes number possible, and number deploys the one. Okay, so it makes number possible, I suppose, in the sense that everything must derive from the one in an arithmetic series, right? Everything to potential infinity, or however fractions or whatever, it all depends on the one as a reference point. But all the numbers, in some ways, the one is immanent in all the numbers, because ultimately, all numbers are collections of ones. And so they're different collections. They're relatively unique, but they derive from the one. So in some ways, this is another representation of, I would say, that he embeds in this chapter on Enoch, because it does not really fit with the flow of the entire text. He doesn't really speak in this way, except for here in the chapter on Enoch, in this way. But he kind of employs what I could call some sort of, Pythagoreanism of a sort, although perhaps, he could have just gleaned it from his own experiences, of course. But it resembles it insofar as there is definitely the movement of all multiplicity and all differentiation, which are ones. These are their collections. They are discrete, 2, 3, 4, but each discrete entity is ultimately rooted in the one. And in some ways, the one is immanently present in all these different manifestations. And so in a way, this is an arithmetical articulation of his theophonic cosmology, because just as the one is immanent in the collections of numbers in the later numerals, the hidden reality, the deity, is out of its desire and longing to see itself, sees itself, but in doing so, it transmutes. It transmutes that mirror, that kind of stuff, that dark, dusky stuff that we saw at the beginning. It's everything is granted discrete unity and and ordered multiplicity. So you've probably seen, despite my rambling about this and perhaps my lack of clarity, that there's quite a bit in this text, because I've only maybe looked at 4 pages worth of content in about 130. So there's a lot there, and there's a lot that I have not even mentioned. Quotes. He has another perplexing statement where he talks about how the creatures, in one way, creatures are creative, and another way, he talks about the created creator and the creative creatures, right? And so there's another sort of use of this dyad of active and passive, of creative, of creation. And my suggestion is that he kind of, I think at times, has to confound our assumptions about linear causality, but it's not this sort of sentimental hatred for metaphysics. It's not, I would suggest there are principles, and there is a system, and it's in some ways captured in this one Pythagorean image. So here's the quote. I did have part of it. So one is the origin of number, but the number is distinct from the one. So here was the quote, though there's more to it. So the reality is at once the created creator, al-khaliq al-makhluq, and the creating creature, al-makhluq al-khaliq. So that concludes the Ibn Arabi, and I should probably stop there, because there are other thinkers I could talk about, but you guys are probably sick of hearing me.
Yeah, I think that's.
Thanks.
Go ahead.
Thanks very much. There's quite a lot there, and please, if anybody has any questions for Rhatib, feel free. We can shift into question time if you like.
Well, yeah, I'll just comment. I think that's a good place to stop, because I won't be able to stay, too much longer. But if there's an opportunity for you to present all that other material sometime, that might be great on the other thinkers. But yeah, no, it was very rich. The context was helpful about the Greek reception, the Arabic reception of Greek philosophy in general, and Plato's Timaeus, and some of the parallels you drew to Ibn Arabi were great, and provocative. I guess one thing just on, you know, there in I have Zale's translation of the Timaeus, and he makes much of the debate in sort of Timaeus studies about how this cosmogony is to be taken, whether it's you know, literal or metaphorical. And I think you know, close to that passage you cited is Timaeus saying that you know, it's a likely account. And I'm curious, you know, your thoughts on how do we take Ibn Arabi's cosmogony? I think you called it poetic at one point, but I don't know. Is it? Yeah, I guess to ask that same question of Ibn Arabi, is it literal or metaphorical, or how are we to take this story about you know, the reality wishing to you know, disclose itself in a sort of image?
Yeah, I don't know. I'd honestly like to hear what you think about that, because or Brian or Javier for that matter, because I don't know. I kind of shy away from even. I don't let my mind go there. You know, I had a teacher for Plato who told me. I'm not saying it's not worth it, but he told me once. He's just let a story be a story. When some students asked him this sort of thing, not just about the Timaeus, but about anything, and which is a non-answer. And but I think the non-answer is the right answer. I look, that being said, I don't know, the stuff with this unpolished mirror and the divine breath, and I mean, I don't even, you know, I think he says like a polished mirror. I'll have to go double check the quote, which could be quite important, but you know, that one difference. But actually, I don't have the Arabic with me right now, but I will say, regardless, I do think that insofar as these dyads, as I call them, of love and vision, it's another question you could say of Suhordi, of Plotinus. You know, when they talk about vision and beholding intelligible realities or beholding lights, I mean, how do you take that? I suppose the Timaeus account, because it's a lot more, for lack of a better term, human, since it is a craftsman and he's copying, and the image is a lot more evocative, then there's probably a want to push that likely story analysis. Ibn Arabi, though, doesn't really use that language, at least not in this text. And I have to emphasize this a million times, that I've really only read the Bezels of Wisdom, and I've done some of the Arabic, and I mean, his thought is just, it's expansive. But I know you'll find that things that are a lot more, you'll find things that are a lot more poetic, as I put it, than you will in the beginning of the Fusus. I mean, you have things on like the preserved tablet, the pen, the kind of the topography of heaven, you know, things that are quite bewildering. So, I mean, this is just my personal approach. In some ways, I just naively affirm it, at least for the sake of reading the dialogue or reading a text. I affirm it. I don't, you know, I don't let, for example, an issue of anthropomorphism deter me if I'm reading the section on demiurge. Now, of course, it's very important, because if you're going to try to reconcile that with other metaphysical principles, yeah, that's where the rubber hits the road. But that's all to say. I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry, but I just let the story be a story. I do. Oh, what I was going to say is, I think the vision and love, though, I think that I don't really see that they're, because it's this idea of beholding, of witnessing, or these latent essences, or like in Suhordi, you have these immaterial lights. I mean, where do you draw the line between allegory and between, you know, literal? I mean, in some ways, that you could say, and I think Suhordi does say this, that the light, you know, of the lamp or the fire, that participates in the immaterial light. It's not simply that he kind of looked at lights around here and, you know, used it as a nice analogy to describe metaphysics. It's that the light here, much in, I think, a Platonic sense, is an image of what's above, and it's not the other way around. You know, so I know that the study of analogy is it's a science, or, you know, it's an ocean in itself. But what's the term? The primary analog, or the reference point, I think, for these thinkers is the higher, and not the lower. You know, I mean, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I asked the question because I don't have such a clear grasp on it, but I think that question you ask about where the line is between, analogy and literal, that's a good question, because when we're communicating ideas like this amongst humans, we have to um, uh, hook on to concepts that are familiar. And when we're talking about things such as ultimate reality or God, um, really that likeness is going to break down. Um, but it's also necessary, right? Like if we want to say anything about it, we have to use concepts that their ordinary context is ordinary existence. Um, and I think also my sense of, and I haven't read Ibn Arabi in the original. I sort of know him from, William Chittick and Henri Corbin. But my sense is that, he is not trying to do, for the most part, like rigorous philosophy and metaphysics and, sort of be exact and consistent in his um, definitions and that sort of thing. It's he's trying to transmit a disposition and like a way of seeing. And so for that, the evocative language is quite helpful. And also, yeah, he's a bit of a Socratic figure in that he says things which are puzzling or counterintuitive or or blasphemous on their face a little bit, right? To kind of pop you out of your way of ordinary thinking and see things in a different light. So I think his use of language is quite strategic in that way, and his use of image and metaphor. And also, like, you have a concept um, like the emergence of all this diversity and multiplicity from a single principle, and then you can sort of explain it different ways to get at it. So like one is this arithmetical meditation that you presented about the number, so that's a way that I've seen other philosophers present it, right? Like, so that's one kind of way that he presents it. It's not his main way of explaining things, but it's a way that you can kind of grasp something similar to what he's talking about when he's talking about, say, the names, the divine names and manifestation, right? Um,
Yeah.
and so the relationship between the one and the multiples, could be similar to all these sort of like, active, passive, sort of active participle and passive participle pairs that he paints out with the divine names, right? So, okay, which is correct? Is it, uh, you know, Rub and Arbab, or is it one and many? Well, it's both, right? And there are different ways of talking about the same thing. But yeah, but there's a sort of narrative. There's a narrative. You're talking about is the. I think you were discussing like is the act of seeing eternal, right? And my sense is that yes, he holds to like eternity of these divine acts, but the narrative that he gives doesn't make that apparent, because it's like, God was alone and then God did this and then God did that, so he gives it in a like a temporal sequence. But I don't think if you pressed him, he would say, yes, there was a temporal sequence. He's using temporality to communicate something about, say, ontological priority.
Yeah.
So so but you can't to tell a story, and he's telling a story to give us a taste of what it's about. He's interested in telling the story because that gives us that, that desire, that the desires you talk about, the desire of expression, and then that reciprocal, desire and thirst for return, you can give that in a temporal story in a way that's much more comprehensible and relatable than talking about, ontological priority, and things like that. So I think the story is a story, but the story tells something. And I think maybe in his experience, he sees things, and the disclosures to him are often in the form of images and symbols. That's how he encounters these realities as well, and then communicates them in similar form.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I didn't mean to be dismissive of the question. I mean, it's something that I think about. I think it really, I started to think about it when I started reading Plato. I mean, some time ago, but I find like like in Plotinus, you'll find when he talks about the relationship between the one and the intellect, and for lack of a better term, the formation or the emergence of the intellect from the one. There's also, it seems to be a temporal discussion, but of course, I wouldn't misconstrue that to mean that it actually unfolded in time. But yeah, I think that there is something to be said for. I think if there's something that kind of it's in the nature of language itself, and I haven't given it too much thought, but I think simply the jump, if you will, or the movement from an intuitive intellectual vision or witnessing, or however you want to put it, into discursive reason, and therefore into sort of discrete concepts and syllogistic reasoning, and then language, which is a sign of that all. Yeah, I wouldn't say there's something lost per se, but there's in the same way that, I don't know, the soul is in Timaeus, what is it? The world soul is an image of eternity. Our reasoning, our disjointed, or not disjointed, but our the complex nature of our reasoning could be an image of something that's intuitively grasped in a simple, comprehensive manner. So, it's just a fuller. I mean, it's in some ways the same movement. It's a movement from an intuitive, unitive grasp of some reality, and then a movement into articulation, reason, which is by its nature going to be made up of parts, and therefore easily perhaps corruptible. I mean, not always, but I suppose that's one reason why why philosophers disagree, is because they don't all have that same intuitive grasp, or even if they do, they have to articulate it quite differently. But I don't know. Yeah, it's I don't know. Maybe it's just because personally, I also regard poetry, the right, proper poetry, to be, if not above, lest I speak blasphemy, if not above discursive reason and kind of philosophy, at least indispensable in that endeavor. So, but that's just sort of a idiosyncratic position I've reached. Oh, so my point is that from that, I don't, when I get sort of what I call poetic language, it doesn't, I just, I try to just kind of sew them together. If I see sort of logical reasoning, I just trust in perhaps naively, I trust in the author. But yeah, it's not an easy thing.
On a quite different note, I was curious, you just to know a little bit more about, you talked about the three sort of the three Timaeuses that were in Arabic, right?
Yeah.
The Ruhani, the spiritual, and there was the physical. I guess I'm just a bit curious to return to that, but also particularly like was one of them a medical? What were those?
Yeah, look, I mean, this is I try to look for like these texts. I just couldn't find them. Obviously, the obvious presentation I would be doing today would be a reading of one of these fragments. Wait, where is it? So I just took this from that text by Das, and I will say, I mean, I did say some stuff about how I wasn't, before we even began the presentation, about how some of her, well, I couldn't quite fully follow her, the narrative of her book, if I can put it that way. There was some very good kernels in there, but like I said, in case you need or I can give you the name of the text later, but it's relatively new. But she has, yeah. So I just took this straight from her. So this, I mean, this is not things I said. I mean, I got some of the more specific things about who these figures were, like the Sheik and these guys, but I mean, I honestly don't know much more about it than what's on this slide.
Okay.
I know that.
Yeah. No.
I think she was saying that that this third one it's preserved in manuscripts. These are taken principally in what was listed in Ibn Nadim's bibliography or in other bibliographies. So that's where she kind of went, and I'm assuming this is where she began to research, went and saw, okay, what was available then. She has very short quotes from this last one, very short, but so she must have had access to the entire thing. And I can only think maybe she wants to publish it as a separate text because it didn't seem like there was all that much there, because she focuses the second half of her book, which I didn't cover because I just didn't know how to really make the connections without literally reproducing the entire book. She talks about Avicenna, Rhatib ibn Ishaq, who I just mentioned, and then another guy, Al-Razi, I should call him another guy, and their kind of very specific influences on specific medical topics. And so, to be honest, it's something that I really have no exposure to, and it was very, very, how else? I just know how to present it, to be honest. But
is this Al-Razi the Asharite theologian? Which Al-Razi?
Let me just double check. Yeah, Abu Bakr.
Okay.
Yeah, Abu Bakr, the one that's in the, let me see, 12th, 251, 10th century. Yeah. So sorry, yeah, I don't know that I have that much more to say about that. I don't. Oh yeah, so I don't. She hints that these still exist, obviously, because she must have access to something. But I don't know that. I think that they already were the nature of their transmission. The fact that, like, for example, I think the physical Timaeus. I mean, I put fragments, but I think it was like an epitome. The first one's a paraphrase, which isn't that much different, and the last one's a commentary. So aside from that isolated report in Ibn Nadim, I think that there was an actual translation of the text, but that's no longer extant. This is what she's relying on principally. I mean, of course, the bulk of the second half of the book, which was interesting, but I don't know how pertinent it was to today. It wasn't from these texts. It was from, like, for example, it was from Rhatib ibn Ishaq's book on ophthalmology, which is called Kitab al-Masa al-Ashr fi something, in the science of, I forgot what it is, but ophthalmology, and she was just kind of trying to show that there are certain Galenic or Timaean parallels that she could draw, which I found interesting, but I don't know. I mean, probably my parallels are no closer. I mean, hers are probably closer, but they weren't sort of, okay, here's a textual citation here's a citation by Ishaq of Galen or of the Timaeus.
Mm-hmm.
Last one.
Yeah.
Oh, the last one. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to comment. Yeah, so it's not just for people watching. It's not Fakhruddin Arazi, the Ashari theologian.
No.
Yeah.
The last thing I will say, I didn't get to this, of course, and I don't have that much to say about it. So Jabir ibn Hayyan, the alchemist, right? He has a okay. 1 second. He has a text. I just forgot the name of the text, but in case you're
Oh,
interested.
I hope you get to present this stuff.
Honestly, I wasn't all that happy with what I did already, so I don't know that there's much in this, but I can share this with you. But here, how do I make this? Oh, there we go. So he has a text called here Al-Musahhahat Al-Ashr or Al-Ashra. It's called the 10 corrections or rectifications. Now, there is a manuscript of this. It's being handled by there's some group, like I think in the Netherlands, that is doing like alchemical studies. But I don't know if it's still going on. The site looked like it was set up in 2017 and there's nothing new. So I have no idea, I tried to find this text. I know it's a real text. I've seen it referenced in other places, but it seems to be the 10 corrections, meaning that there were 10 masters that, and also the Geber corpus, there's large amounts of pseudo-Geberian or, Jabir texts, because it's anything to do with alchemy and magic and astronomy. But this text seemed to be more or less, actually I was quite surprised that there's some scholars who think he was a complete fabrication. I don't know if it doesn't mean too much one way or the other, but I'm just going to suppose he existed. So he has a text that seems to be, at least to his time period, called the 10 Rectifications. And it's about 10 different or a couple different masters of alchemy or of the art who he sees as being, I think, corrections in the sense that, or returning to the art as alchemy is called, as-sina'a, or the craft. So these are supposedly, I think a lot of them are Greek. I think it's Empedocles, I think, is in there. I think Aristotle and Socrates is in there. Now, the point is that he's, I think, trying to build a genealogy without having read the text, but read about it, a genealogy of great philosophical, spiritual masters who were alchemists. And he cites in that text, on the basis of a paper, or not a paper, actually, that website I found, they just mention offhand that in that text, Jabir mentions that Socrates handed the science of alchemy, the secrets of alchemy, to Timaeus, of all people. Amongst his students, he gave it to Timaeus. And I would guess that was said because, of course, Timaeus has vast cosmological knowledge. I don't know why, but that's the tradition that Jabir relates in that text, which I do not have access to. But then there is another shorter dialogue which I was able to find or tract. I translated it quite roughly, but the only thing, without taking up too much time, is I just want to bring up this, that he just, I just kind of cut and paste what I did. But he says that he has an introduction where he praises God and says that he's written like 100 short treatises, and this is the 111th, so it must have some numerological significance. But it's the abstract of the abstract, or it's the summation of the summaries. Basically, that's the name of this tract. And so he relates this almost conversation between Socrates and his teachers. So he said, what I write and mention is nothing more than what Socrates has said. Allah yarhamu, God mercy be upon him. So he asked some of his students about the nature of the art, and it's as-sina'a. So I'm assuming, because in the West you will even see it today, is alchemy is the art. So I think that's kind of what he's talking about. So they responded, clarify for us in a concise manner, O wise master, something of its nature that has not already been communicated in either symbol, rams, or idea, loosely fikra, and does not rely upon extraneous elements in its explanation. So, it seems to me that they're requesting a direct sort of revelation of what alchemy is. Socrates, may God have mercy upon him, replied, "This is my boy, or my student, something forbidden to us with respect to the art," meaning, the divulgence or clear communication. "For in order that I may bring you to an approximation of the meanings of the art, your elixir," and this is probably just a bad translation, but it's probably also difficult on purpose, "your elixir must combine the soul and the body in such a way that what the elixir has of soul far outweighs what it has of body. Only then will you have the right to have what you seek. For if the soul is not such in your elixir, then the operations of the dyeing of the dyes will not be complete, for the dyeing is done to the souls, not the bodies." Anyway, and then he talks about some other operations, which in quite a, he says the body, it's the bond and shackle of the spirit and soul, which is quite Socratic, fair enough. and then managing the soul, freeing it from its impurities and filth, and purifying it from removing its impurities. And he talks about these alchemical operations, fermentation, takhmir, putrefaction, ta'fin, distillation. And then he says that these operations are what the philosophers have kept to themselves. So we're quite far afield now from Timaeus, but on the basis of some amateur detective work, it seems like Jabir saw Socrates as, well, in that other text, as a master of the art. But here explicitly, I mean, this is by the way, this is in a collection of Arabic texts. Most of it is on alchemy. And it's pretty clear to me because I cross-referenced some other shorter epistles where it's quite clear on alchemy that the art, the sina here is alchemy. And then the rest of it, by the way, it's like 10 pages long. I didn't translate the whole thing because, I mean, even this last paragraph gave me some trouble in the sense of I defined what these specifically correlated to in terms of alchemical operations. But the rest of it is just like principles of alchemy, like almost just a guideline. And it's all a mixture of this sort of spiritual purification type of language with very outwardly alchemical or chemical language. But the elixir here, when he says elixir, the word is iksir, which I believe is from I think it's Greek. I am almost certain is an elixir. As a result, comes from the Arabic elixir. So I don't know what to do with that, but I just found it interesting that that Timaeus seems to be the one, for some reason or the other, is the student who received this from Socrates, and then here we actually have a reproduction or an imagination of how that talk went.
Yeah, that's a very interesting passage. Thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I mean, from the operations described in here, your last paragraph, I think it makes it clear that the question is about alchemy, the art. Yeah, very interesting.
There's also. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna shift gears a little, if you wanted to say.
No, I was going to say that it was, what's interesting to me, although this is pretty universal. I mean, Ghazali has it. I don't know that you could just peg this down to Socrates, although we are explicitly talking about Socrates. Jabir seems to have known, at the very least, that, I can't remember what dialogue it is. It's the Phaedo, I think, or maybe in the Phaedrus, where he talks about the body as the shackle or the prison of the soul. So he obviously knew that Socrates had used this similar analogy, although it's pretty universal, but he also had a very, very much a moral component to him. Although, how hard it is to know that does not mean that he had access to Timaeus, obviously.
Yeah, no, I am curious to dig into Das's book a little bit, and see what she says about the sourcing and stuff, because that's interesting. So I'm going to ask you a question, which I'm sure she answers, and I do have access to that book, because I think the digital version is made available by the publisher. But my question is, as far as Galen and the medical and which portions of the Timaeus were they interested in from a medical point of view? What was it about this dialogue that drew attention by Galen and the Arab physicians?
It seems to me that it was the section on the senses seemed to come up quite a bit, but and perhaps this was a cowardly escape from trying to present things that were quite arcane to me. But I just, I was reading some of the things that she was doing in terms of comparing it with Al-Razi. I could kind of the earlier one, Hunayn ibn Ishaq, she talks about ophthalmology and how the eye and that there's a crystalline structure that surrounds the pupil, and that is a kind of diaphanous medium that transmits light to the pupil, which is the locus of the eye, of the vision. So there, very much, it's clear just from the Phaedrus. It's from here. I can because I have another mock-up of this presentation that I did not use, which has some of that stuff. Second, because I have the reference there from Timaeus, but it's a section on vision, on the senses, which is let me see if I can find it. It's when he talks about how the eyes, it talks about how the eyes, I think, are the most divine power, or the first power that the demiurge gave to man because of its its sanctity is found precisely in the fact that it allows us to observe the movements of celestial bodies. And so when he talks about the eyes, there's or vision, that's where there's a discussion about the nature of vision itself. So she spends quite a bit of time. It is interesting. I don't know. I guess I was not just drawn. That's not the stuff that draws me so much in the Phaedrus. But it was a discussion. I think that there was a key modification done by Muslims, or addition, which is of this kind of diaphanous crystalline element, which is in the eye, and aids in the transmission of color and of light. But I'll try to find the actual reference point right now. Can you see the screen now or no?
Yes.
Do you see a different one?
Yes.
Okay. Just have it. Okay, I don't know what happened. I might have gotten rid of that one by mistake, but here, I'll try to dig around and see, because I thought this was a different edition. No, it's too old fashioned. Sorry about that. I'm thinking we should probably also end the recording. I don't know. I can keep it. I think Brian can edit it. It is okay. So the section that she seemed to be kind of constantly going back as reference was roughly 43a, which is the creation of the body, right? So before that, the first, so more or less, so from the beginning of the account, so like there's the being, sameness, difference, that kind of the proportions and the splitting at the beginning, which is like 36, 35b. So from there up until about 42e is broadly, I suppose, the celestial bodies and cosmology. 43a is where she really takes a lot of her stuff. I mean, obviously she quotes from all across the dialogue, but on the more precise medical aspects, it's really 43a to for a while, and then vision comes up very quickly, which is at which is at 45b.
Mm-hmm.
And that begins with the eyes of the first organs to be fashioned by the gods to conduct light. And she keeps going back to more or less those kind of key selections. Which makes sense because those have to do with anatomy, but they're just, from what I recall, there wasn't all that much on, there's a little bit on the elemental shapes and the Platonic solids, but a lot of it was really just on those very specific, those very specific parts. I think there's a part towards the end as well where it talks about the nature of sensations and pleasure, and the mixture of the different.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Like when I first read this, I didn't have like a medical lens, and I'm like thinking, you know, I'm not taking the physiology like so literally, and it's like, oh, it's a two balls and four extent, I'm like looking for what's the symbolism in that or something. But then other people reading these same passages can really be looking quite deep into the anatomical consequences. So it's interesting to see
Yeah.
how many different ways there have been to read these texts, these passages.
I will say, and
And
Brian, sorry, and Brian could probably answer to this better than I can, but I remember reading Lucretius on the nature of things, and he has quite an interesting. I mean, granted, he was no Platonist, but a very extended and interesting. I mean, I just remember this from years ago, a discussion on what sort of an atomistic, uh, cosmology, and he goes into detail on like even things as like how do the atoms arrange with each, like are atoms smooth or sharp, how do they arrange with each other, the shapes of their arrangement, and how that can produce harsh sounds, soft sounds, basically the interplay between the nature of the atom physically, almost mechanical, its qualities, and then the effects of that on sensation. So I mean, that's not Islamic, but I found that I liked it because it's entertaining to read, but it's quite detailed in that respect. But my broad knowledge of Hellenism is not for like Hellenistic texts. I mean, it's quite limited.
yeah, no, thanks for engaging with my questions. I'm gonna be able to listen, I think, but I won't be able to chat much now. But thanks so much.
No, I'm glad you sat through it and endured.
No, it was interesting. Yeah, and I appreciate that it's sort of preliminary explorations, but I think the parallels you drew with Ibn Arabi, there's a lot there. I mean, clearly, the resonances between Plotinus and the theology of Aristotle, like the theology of Aristotle and Plotinus and Enniads and Ibn Arabi's, that sort of diagram you had of the sort of emanation and return. I mean, I think that's no stretch to say there's some commonality there. Um, but even some of these specific things, and now that I'm looking at this vision section as well, um, in the Timaeus, like it hadn't stuck in my mind particularly, but I can see that there is quite a focus on the eyes and the operation of vision and mirrors and eyelids and all that kind of stuff, which is and sensation, which which
Yeah,
which which hadn't I hadn't dwelled on, but there is that in the Timaeus.
yeah, and it's a section that I didn't go over this part, but I have a section on the Brethren of Purity where I'm drawing not really from the Timaeus but from the Phaedrus, and there's a story in the Phaedrus about Thoth, who is Hermes, who is, or at least I'm not going to just say that he is that, but he's the god of writing and of, I think, arithmetic and dice of all things. I think it's some sort of game, and he comes to Tammuz, or who is Ammon, and he says, "I've got this gift for mankind, which is writing." And he said it's a remedy for forgetfulness. And then the king of the gods says, no, that's it's going to aid them in their forgetfulness, something to that effect. Anyway, so this whole thing about writing and its nature, and the difference between the writing on the physical text and on the soul, that's done through dialogue. And in the Brethren of Purity, they have this kind of creation narrative in one of their epistles on the creation of Adam and Eve, and on their descent to Earth, and then the population of the populating the Earth with different peoples. But it's all done in this narrative of the movement from a type of almost non-linguistic or non pre-linguistic communication between Adam and Eve, and then the emergence of spoken languages and their diversification, and then the emergence of writing, and the emergence and language emerges. I'll find it right now, but I mean, here I have it's volume 217. So I don't, Brian, should we end this presentation, because this could be another like half-hour discussion, but
No, I mean, I think it's fine, just to, I mean, I could always break it up potentially, but,
Okay,
just if
So-
there's, and
Yeah,
feel free,
I mean-
by the way, I mean, we'd love if you could share this presentation with the group so that people can kind of,
Oh, of course.
'cause
Yeah,
there's
I
so
saw.
much
I saw.
to explore and unpack. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure people would love to look this over.
I saw the message from Javier, so I'll post it. But okay, I'll just give it a go. But just to answer your question, it's epistle. I mean, this is a problem. I have this, which is the Arabic. And these don't help. It's all black and gold anyway, like leather bound. But based on this, it's volume 2, epistle 17, which is so volume 2 of part 2 is on jismiyat and taghiyat, so more or less on physics. It's broken up, I think, on like mathematical science, and then the second volume that I have is on physics. The third is on like metaphysics, I think, and then there's one on mathematics. But they're broken up according to the sciences. And if it helps, I have a Lebanese Beirut edition in the Arabic. There are translations in English, but they seem to be done piecemeal, and they're prohibitively expensive. So I've actually never seen them, but I think they're Arabic English. So it's volume 2, epistle 17. It's quite long, but I'm just taking. They present a narrative on Adam and Eve, and as I put it, the providential emergence of language and alphabets. So prior to the fall, Adam and Eve seem to have communicated, like I said, non-verbally. It's not very clear. But because later in the narrative, languages come to be, I'm just kind of assuming that there was some other mode, or it could have been maybe in some, primitive, I mean, not in a bad sense, but just elderly parent language. In any case, Adam and Eve before the fall, though, so it seems to be shortly after creation, whatever that's worth. Shortly after creation, they're made articulate. And then the fall occurs, or they descend to the earth, and then languages begin to diversify according to Adam. I think that they say some early ones were like Nabatean, and there's another language I'm forgetting, but Greek was also recognized for, and as you'll see, for a specific reason. Then there's the emergence of alphabets and scripts, and then Arabic comes about, and then the Quran is revealed. So you see, there's a teleological movement all the way from creation of Adam and Eve as rational beings, rational natures, all the way to the revelation of the Quran, which of course, these guys are Muslims. Of course, there's a lot, you could say that they're described as being Ismaili, they're described as being Hermeticists from Harran, which is a very interesting but mysterious place in Arabia. But they seem to practice some sort of monotheism, which is affiliated with the stars, but who knows? They were described as Shias, they've been described as Platonists, so, but whoever they are, and we do know some of their names, but that's not the point here. They took Muslim narratives quite seriously, it seems. So there's a teleological movement from creation to the revelation of God's word into creation through the Prophet Muhammad. And then I've just included some sections that I've once again translated. I don't know how well. And I'm sure these sections, I don't even know if they're translated in English, but this is what I got. So he talks about how this is once people came to be. I assume that the sons of Adam, I don't know how many generations, but meaning people were describing things by their attributes, not with connected letters, not through written composition. So mu'allafa bil kitaba. So who knows, not with connected letters. I don't know what that really means, but it says Adam, peace be upon him, taught them these names through oral transmission and custom. And talqeen isn't just oral transmission. There seems to be a sense of like almost, not telepathy, but talqeen is like, I think one of the meanings is like if things are close, or, there's a type of transmission. And ta'rif it can be custom, but it can also mean maybe it should better be definition, through defining. Just as one who is, but the point is that Adam communicated to his progeny, just as one who is unlettered is taught things. That's how they were taught. Man preserved these names and attributes received from their predecessors until the passing of the cycle of Taurus into that of Gemini. and I don't know if cycle is the right astrological word, but that seems to be how I translated it. But there's a movement from Taurus and Gemini. Then writing appeared as is proper to the house of Mercury, who's Hermes, who's Idris, which is an exaltation, Sharaf, so that's the astrological term. So when Mercury was in the house of Mercury, which is an exaltation, meaning I think its beneficent powers are at the strongest or it's dominant, then writing appeared, and its letters were 24, being the Greek script, because to each constellation belonged 2 letters, and there's 12 constellations. And so these utterances or alfaz were determined, set, and the names were written in the letters of the people of that time. So here we have a movement from oral transmission to language, and to scripts, because it seems there's letters, or at the very least language. Well, no, there is script. They're written in the letters of the people at that time. And it's Greek, and there's 24 letters, which has a cosmological or astrological significance. And then he goes on to say, the art of writing spread and diversified until the number of letters came to completion at 28. So from 24 to 28, ceasing to expand at this number, as this number is from amongst the perfect numbers. In this way, the art of writing came to perfection in the Arabic language, the seal of the scripts, and the ultimate number of letters, or the greatest number, or the perfect number of letters. Just as the law, or the Sharia of Islam, the revealed law, or the way of Islam, is the last of the laws, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, is the seal of the prophets and lawbringers. So you see there's this, and 28, of course, so you move from 24 with Greek, which is there's 2 letters for each astrological sign or constellation. And then with 28, of course, you have the mansions of the moon. There's 28 mansions of the moon. And so to each letter, and this is a well-known correspondence. I mean, I didn't even mention it, but Ibn Arabi, I suppose, also has, and it's Titus Burkhardt has a text on astrology in Ibn Arabi, I think. And there there are letters that are actually affiliated with each mansion of the moon, making, a 28 cycle for each month. So I'm no expert in numerology, and I think it takes more than just study. I think there's some sort of grand lifting of a veil that it takes to understand, but there seems to be something here. I just brought so that's sort of the genealogy of language. And there's a teleological movement towards Arabic and towards revelation of the Quran. And then you have a cosmological aspect to letters itself. And what I suggest is that this is a sort of like conversion of Pythagorean. The importance of that was placed on number is now placed on letters of the Arabic language. So the origin of all of these letters, meaning the Arabic, well, I guess all letters in all scripts, are 2 addresses, or 2 khitab, could also be like sermons, or it's I'll be honest, it's ambiguous, so it's hard for me to translate, but there's 2 addresses, like God addresses man. So Almighty God is their creator of these addresses, or these scripts, alone transcending all which proceeds from them. These are the straight line, which is the diameter of the circle, and the curved line, which is its arc. The first letter is a straight line, the alif. So these are references to the earth, and I'll give you as a representation of it. So the first letter is the alif, or the straight line, and the second is the ba, which is the beta, alpha beta, is the ba. And corresponding to these in the upper world is that which is prior, sabiq, the intellect, and that which is complete, at-tam, or the soul. The soul is beneath the intellect, and from them, meaning from them both, comes to be all that is in the lower world. Just as Adam and Eve, they are the progenitors, male and female. The form of man resembles the straight line, and the forms of animals resemble the curved line. The celestial realm and the residents of the heavens have straight shapes and complete forms. They are of the straight line. That which is beneath the moon is in the domain of the curved line. In this manner, the numbers emerge from the 1 and 2. The 1 resembling the straight line and the 2 resembling the curved. They are the origin and spring of number. Okay, so that's quite a lot there. I mean, you have the 1 and the 2, kind of the monad and dyad. Then you have these letters, and this is how I represented them. Of course, complete with image of Thoth. But the alif is, so for those of you guys who don't know Arabic or are not familiar with script, so this is what we call alif. This is the A, the first letter, or the alpha, and this is ba, the beta. And so if we go back really quick, we see that the alif is a straight line. It's the diameter of the Oh, okay. All right. Thanks. Well, then I'll be able to see how poor of a translator I am. But thanks. I'll check it out. Um, the first letter is a straight line, or the alif. The second is the ba. So there's it's so like embedded in the language itself. And remember when I was talking about the genealogy of the letters, these are providentially sort of revealed, gradually unfolding these alphabets until they come to some sort of completion in 28, which is the Arabic alphabet. And so I would assume, based on this sort of providential framework, that even the shapes of the letters would have some significance, and in fact they do. So that the alif, which is the first address, the first khitab, is a straight line, which is the diameter of the circle, and the ba is I mean, it's not quite a semicircle, but it is curved. It's not a straight line. That's the beta. And so all the remainder of the letters come out of this, if you will, matrix of the alif and the ba, which he likens to the one and the one and the two. And then, of course, cosmologically, I've just arranged it like this because you have the one, which he calls the sabiq, the intellect, or the aql, and then he has what's below the aql, or what is the tam, the complete, which is the soul. And I didn't put it here, but obviously I would assume it would be safe to say that what precedes the intellect, or precedes the alif, is probably the inarticulable reality, which is God, because it's beyond language, it's before, prior to language. So here you could say, if you pushed it, but I think it's reasonable, that you have a sort of Neoplatonic kind of, a Plotinian cosmology, roughly. You have the one, or God, the creator, then you have the alif, the intellect, and the heavenly spheres, and also mysteriously the form of man. But that's probably just because he has an intellect, his nature is intellectual, or intelligent, or rational. And then you have ba, which is part of the sublunary world, right? That which is beneath the moon is in the domain of the curved line. Remember, the curved line is the ba. And so it seems to be perhaps a world soul of a sort, but this is definitely the sublunary world, and of animals and plants and other organisms. And so it seems like there's, through this mixture of alpha and beta, of 1 and 2, of intellect and soul, these are, as they say, the origin and spring of number. And once again, we're reminded of Ibn Arabi and the emergence of numbers from the one. Anyway, so that's a very kind of, and then here I just wanted to represent and just show that there was a shift. Of course, you could argue what's the greatest art of Islam, but I think it's unique art. Maybe not unique, kind of the Chinese have it, but they were uniquely skilled at their calligraphy, right? So here, this is from Al-Azhar. I think it's from Iran somewhere. I mean, not Azhar, this is from in Spain, in Granada. I'm forgetting the Al-Hamra, the palace, right? So you have a mixture of geometric designs and shapes and floral designs, with, of course, interspersed with literally letters, right? So the letters are, you see here visually the link between the letter and number, or what's here, letter and proportion. Anyway, that last part's kind of muddled, but I'll just point out really quickly.
I'll just mention, there's a book by Alain Georges called The Rise of Islam. Is it The Rise of Islamic Calligraphy? And he goes in, he's sort of drawing on primary sources, but he talks about the the system of proportions in Islamic calligraphy, and analyzes it through a lot of the numbers and ratios and numerology in the Brethren of Purity.
Oh, okay, nice. Yeah, because right after this section, I didn't use it, but right after this section, I mean, it's in the same section, but it's right after he concludes this narrative. He goes into calligraphy, because it's like it's this genealogy of language, then a kind of cosmological role of Arabic, and then it's into calligraphy. And they talk about, which is very well known. I just don't know much about the art, but I know that a lot of the alif just as the alif here has a pivotal role as a principle, the alif is the standard against which, you know, if it has like a length of, I don't know, 4 dots or whatever. I mean, I think that's how they did it with dots, but then the alif becomes the standard against which the remainder of the letters are done in this particular system. Anyway, I've got to mute myself really quick. I just got to take a really quick call.
Yeah, perhaps the dot
you
in
have
the
to go.
ba it should be placed up top, you know, as the
Yeah,
unitive.
probably. I mean, I just did this because I don't know, you know, I have no idea. They'd probably throw me out of the school because they just say, hey, you're not supposed, here's the answer to your question. You're just, come on, dude, you're not supposed to take this literally. Anyway, I'll be back in a moment. And if you need to go, I don't want to hold you back. I mean, I'm more or less done, but I mean, I'd be happy to stay on and talk.
No, I mean, yeah, this is about the time I'd scheduled, but I'm sure we'll get a chance to chat later. But my main questions I wanted to ask, I did ask. So thank you for putting together all this material.
Yeah, no, I was a little panicked because I was kind of lazily thinking I'd just read that book and kind of just summarize it. But this is good because I these are things that I'm actually quite interested in.
Yeah,
And
many
it shows you
avenues to pursue.
how scattered my mind can be in trying to find these links. But I will still stand by. I think that they're there, if not historically, at least philosophically. So, but yeah, inshallah.
Yes,
we'll speak
definitely
together.
a very rich presentation. A lot of topics that we could delve into later and explore. And I'm really glad you were able to present that for us this evening.
Yeah, it was a pleasure.
All right.